This comment is from Casey. Casey asks, you bring up an interesting point with the car comparisons. Thank you, Casey. A deeper dive into cost of ownership for each vehicle you mentioned could be interesting if the Aston Martin no longer depreciates as many classic cars tend to do. That was a good catch. The cost of ownership might actually be lower, so it could be more frugal to own the Aston Martin in that sense. Thank you for your question, Casey. I really do genuinely appreciate it. I believe you referenced a 5-year lifespan comparison. I ran a 10-year just to double check. According to my numbers, we'll start with the Corvette. With an initial cost of $80,000, I would have about $6,980 in taxes where I live. The average cost to repair a car like that would be $1,200 a year over the span of 10 years. And then for the insurance, we're going to just be comparing collision only. It would be about $500 a year. At the end of that time, looking at the average Corvette, if I purchased it at 4 years old and I drove it no more than 5,000 miles every year, I didn't drive it much, but I did drive it, it would be worth around $35,000 after that decade if I were to choose to sell it or be counting it toward my net worth statement. And I wanted to be keeping that in the context of this analysis. If you run all those numbers, the lifetime cost of owning the Corvette for a decade would be $68,980. Now that's an awful lot of money, and a big chunk, the biggest chunk of that is going to be the depreciation of the Corvette. That's easily the most expensive component for the cost of ownership. Now for the Aston Martin, I did some research on the 1960s Aston Martins and I compared a few of them and I looked at the prices over the last 5 years. To my surprise, they seem to be going down in value overall, but there is evidence to say that they would be about stable if you took good care of it and you really wouldn't depreciate. And in honor of your comment, we're going to assume that the Aston Martin does not depreciate at all. So let's say I bought a $300,000 Aston Martin, 1960 DB5. If I spent that much money on it, I would owe $26,175 in taxes. Ow! Maintenance on this car, being a classic car, would be quite a bit more. It's going to be harder to get parts. In fact, when I was trying to research a reasonable number for it, I saw a joke that said if you're going to buy a classic Aston Martin, buy two. You buy one for the parts. On average, it's going to cost about $3,000 to maintain that car, even driving it at a minimal amount, around 5,000 miles a year. Insurance is going to run an equitable amount more than the Corvette. Because we're talking collision, we're just going to factor it up by about the purchase price and assume $2,500 a year for insurance. If you take those numbers and you run them out a decade and you say that the car at the end of the decade is still worth $300,000, the total cost of ownership is $81,175. So in the end, it's still about $13,000 more expensive to own than the Corvette. Beyond that, beyond just the economical use of the cash flow through the years, you also have the expense of that upfront cost being significantly more. And that upfront value, that upfront purchase price, is primarily going to hurt you in the way of opportunity cost. Opportunity cost for $300,000 is significant. There's an awful lot I can do with that. I could even probably buy a second home for that much. If I bought the $80,000 Corvette, there's not near as much that I could do alternatively with the $80,000. Given that this is a toy and it's a total want, I think it's still going to be the most frugal option to go with the 4-year-old Corvette over the Aston Martin. My wife is going to be pretty happy that this analysis didn't end up changing my mind.